We're going to talk about how lipids are absorbed, used, and stored in this video. So this is the same image we've been looking at, which is sort of the simplified version of cellular respiration. And we spent the last video really looking at how carbohydrates, glucose specifically, goes through cellular respiration. In the absence of oxygen, here you generate a little bit of ATP, but then we learned that in the presence of oxygen you're going to generate a lot more ATP. But you've been a human for a while and you realize that the only nutrient that you can use to form energy is not carbohydrate based. You can use fats and you can use proteins for catabolic processes as well. So I want to talk in this video about fats or lipids. So first off, we have to talk about the breakdown and absorption process, and then we'll talk about what you do with them after you've absorbed. And remember, when we're talking about absorption, what I'm talking about is how you get something from the lumen of your small intestine, usually, into your bloodstream, into the body as a whole. So this picture is specifically looking at lipids, the lipid sort of breakdown and absorption process. But first, the one thing that I need to tell you that actually has to happen before you can absorb a lipid is that you need some bile acids or bile salts produced by the liver to break down larger lipids into triglycerides. And I know that you're not super familiar with the term triglyceride for most of you guys. That's okay. Here is a triglyceride right here. I'll show it to you in a little bit more detail in just a second. But like I said before, when we were talking about carbohydrates, you can't absorb a starch intact, but you can break it down. In that instance, it would be amylase that does that. You can break down a starch to monosaccharides and disaccharides and absorb those, okay? Here, you can break down big fats, big lipids into triglycerides and absorb those, okay? And then what's going to happen is you are going to have to break down the triglyceride. So here's a representation of a triglyceride right here. And notice the three chains that you see right here with sort of the cap on it. That's the same thing sideways. You definitely do not have to draw this or anything like that. But the next step is to take the triglyceride, this guy right here, and break it down into glycerol and fatty acids. Why do you care about glycerol and fatty acids? Well, because those refer directly back to here. Glycerol and fatty acids. Those are the things that you could, for instance, use for catabolic processes to ultimately produce ATP. That's not the only reason you would use them, but that's one of the things that you could do with them. Okay, now, in order to break triglycerides down to glycerol and fatty acids, there's some pancreatic enzymes that are involved. One of them is called lipase. So it breaks down triglycerides to fatty acids and glycerol. Just stick with me, it'll get more interesting in just a second. Okay, so once we get lipids absorbed, they have transport issues and they have a different absorption mechanism than the other macronutrients. Remember that we said that they actually get absorbed into not the bloodstream first, but the lymphatic system first. So they have transport issues because, of course, the blood is mostly water and lipids are lipid soluble, not water soluble. So they have to be packaged. And the way that they are packaged is they are packaged up into this little bubble. This little bubble right here, shown small, is called a chylomicron, okay? And this is what it looks like if you blow it up. There's a whole bunch of lipid portions in the middle. There's some phospholipids. There's some lipoproteins. These guys right here around the outside make it slightly more water soluble, so it's easy to transport. Anyway, once you've got the lipid packaged up into this little lipid bubble with some proteins on the outside, then you move it into the lacteal. And the lacteal is going to bring it through the lymphatic system. And remember, we talked about the lymphatic system is ultimately going to go up and dump into the subclavian veins. So I absorbed it into the lacteal lymphatic system, and then it's going to get dumped into the bloodstream. Okay? Now that it's in the bloodstream, what can you do with fats once they're in the bloodstream? So what are the fates of lipids after you absorb them? Okay, so this picture right here and the link provided will be interesting to you guys if you want to look at this in a little bit more detail. So if you don't need your lipids for catabolism, like you have eaten enough and you have plenty of energy, then what you can do is you can actually store them as triglycerides. Back again to the whole triglyceride. We're going to make them back into triglycerides, and we can store them in our fat tissue, and we can store them in our liver. Okay. You also can take some of your lipids and you can use them for other things besides anabolic or catabolic processes. You need phospholipids for your cell membranes. You need HDL and LDL, the high density lipoproteins and low density lipoproteins. Those are primarily for helping lipid transport in the bloodstream, and we'll talk about those with the reference to dietary cholesterol in just a minute. And then importantly, you probably know that there are some amino acids called the essential amino acids that you can't make. There's 9 of them. But you may or may not know that there's also some essential fatty acids that you can't make. So these fatty acids are not produced by the human body, and you have to ingest them. And that includes the omega-6 fatty acids and the omega-3 fatty acids, and you can get them from a bunch of different food sources. Okay, but now let's go back to our picture about energy. So we're just talking about what could be the possible fates. So you could use them for weird things like phospholipids. They might be essential ones. You might use them for a couple other things. If you have excess, you might store it, but how do you burn it? So let's go back and talk about how do you use it for energy. So fatty acid and glycerol catabolism. So we're using these to make ATP. So what's going to happen is the lipid is going to move into a cell that wants to use it. And it generally is going to move in by diffusion, especially if it's a fatty acid. It's going to move in by diffusion. And then what could occur to it? Well, you could actually use it for a catabolic process and make carbon dioxide, water, and energy out of it. So that would be basically this process. So fatty acids are going to move in. Remember, our triglycerides got broken down to glycerol and fatty acids. I'll talk about glycerol in just a second. The fatty acids will get into the cellular respiration process, generally right before or right after Krebs cycle, depending on which one they are. And they are moving in into cellular respiration, and they are going to be used for the same sort of catabolic processes. Now, what about glycerol? Glycerol can be converted to glucose and enter metabolism at glycolysis. Glycerol is this sort of weird fat-sugar combo thing. So now, interesting thing about your big picture metabolism is that, remember I pointed out to you guys before that many, not all, many of these reactions are two-way reactions, in and out, in, out, in, out, in, out. Because of that, because most of the chemical reactions from glycerol to glycolysis, fatty acids to acetyl-CoA, most of these are reversible, and because of that, it is possible to eat too much fat and end up storing fat. It is possible to eat too much protein and end up storing fat, and it's possible to eat too much sugar and end up storing fat. So fat is one of your primary long-term storage mechanisms, and if you eat enough of any macronutrient, you can actually make it into triglycerides actually and store them that way. So, and eating too much of any macronutrient can cause what we call lipogenesis. Lipogenesis is the weight gain. And think about this, is lipogenesis a catabolic or anabolic process? If I take things and make them into triglycerides and then store those triglycerides in big blobs, is that a catabolic or anabolic process? That's going to be an anabolic process. Okay, and that is, of course, how your adipocytes, are going to store your lipids in your adipose tissue. And one of the interesting things about that is that insulin, the same hormone that we talked about before that actually favors glucose moving into cells, it also favors glycogenesis, it also favors lipogenesis. Okay, there is a text box in chapter 3 called The Effects of Insulin on Cell Metabolism, and it's really interesting. It goes into a little bit about how a diabetic's metabolism is going to favor things like glycogenesis and lipogenesis and those kinds of things. I will stop there, and then I'll do the dietary cholesterols.